Chakshet Pikikarach Wa'u Nunkshina. My name is Alexandrea Walker, and my Hocak name is Chakshet Zwingo, which translates into Golden Eagle Woman. I am from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, and I am a member of the Eagle Clan. In 2023, I started working this year with 3 jobs. And so I worked for an organization called Great Plains Action Society for a little bit as a youth organizer. And so I was focusing on things like critical race theory and telling the truth in public schools and workplaces. I don't think our Native history should be erased at all, and it never will, but some places it might go untold. And so with Great Plains, it helped me find my voice because, they're kind of an Indigenous-led activist organization. So you kind of have to understand that you're going to use your voice at some point. I started my job here as an adjunct at Little Priest Tribal College in the spring semester. I taught 2 classes, Ho-Chunk History 2 and Native American Stereotypes. And so when you combine that with Great Plains and the teaching and telling of the truth, you're going to come out with a lot of information. Lastly, at the 3rd job, I started working in the Ho-Chunk Renaissance Hodogink classroom at the public school. And so I had culture, I had a way to use my voice, and I had a way to emphasize that voice to other people. And so now I am the Native American Studies instructor at Little Priest Tribal College. For myself personally, I can go by any term, but for myself, I like to identify as Indigenous because from my understanding is that I'm not fully Ho-Chunk. Obviously, I'm not just by the way I look when, I'm mixed. But on my Native side of my family, I come from the Sac and Fox people as well, but I am not fully Ho-Chunk. Otherwise, I would just say I'm Ho-Chunk. So I like Indigenous because not all of me is that. And when it comes to the tribal history, there's talk that, hey, we weren't always Ho-Chunk people as well. We had to get with people, other tribes to repopulate our own. I like wearing my Indigenous identity as a shield. And so there's this scene in Reservation Dogs where Willie Jack is sitting and talking with her aunt in a prison setting, and her ancestors start appearing behind her. And so while they aren't always physically here, they're still always around us, our ancestors, those who came before us. And so I like knowing that I'll never be alone. Even if it seems I am by myself, they're still always around. I like to say that I grew up in this community. I grew up in Winnebago. I'm from the reservation. But there's a difference in between growing up in the culture and growing up around it. And so I grew up around it. I got to see everything. I've been to all the powwows every time I've been here in Winnebago. But I didn't get to participate in many ceremonies growing up. And so when I got to college, the University of Nebraska-Omaha, that was the first time that I actually felt as though I was Indigenous. It's when you're out around strangers, people you've never met before, that you realize, hey, I'm different. And the reason why I'm different is because of these things. And so, in many of my classes, there weren't any Native people in there. There were Native students there. But it was when I got there that I realized, hey, I am Native American. Nobody's going to understand the struggle from here. I'm from the reservation. Nobody else is going to understand the struggle of being Native and from a reservation. And on top of that, I'm mixed. Nobody's going to understand that same meaning of being Native, living on the reservation, and being mixed like I do. And so I've ran into things where people talk about not being Native enough. But I think about that, and I must have been Native enough to be enrolled, so not everybody gets that privilege that I do. And so when it comes to that, I'm fortunate, but I know that's not always going to be the case. I think of people who don't always have Native on both sides of their families, and so often they are in the place of discrimination because of that. So walking in 2 worlds is actually a perfect phrase for how I would identify my life. So I had mentioned before that I went to the University of Nebraska-Omaha. It was there when I was like, I wish I had a ribbon skirt for every day of the week. And so now if you see me in person working and teaching my classes, you'll notice, hey, she has a different ribbon skirt on every day. I love beaded earrings. You can see it right now. But a lot of this stuff is handed down or was given to me. And so the ribbon skirt I'm wearing today was made by my aunt. She made it for me. These earrings were passed down from my great-great-grandmother. And then we're talking about my medicine bag that my mom made for me. And so the things that were handed down for me by these people, it gave me strength. And so we talked about shields earlier when it comes to my ancestors, but the people who are currently around me, my support system provided me with strength. And so the shirt I'm wearing, Res Girls Can Do Anything, you know, I feel like there's empowerment in that. Personality list, I always go by Native American or American Indian when I check it out myself. And that's just because at a young age, my mom kind of instilled that narrative in my mind, like, hey, no matter what you do, click Native American or choose that option for yourself. Just because, well, at the end of the day, that's what I am, no matter how I look. And so she kind of not only did that at a young age for myself, but she also gave me that Native identity. Not everybody is going to identify with a tribe, but they could be Indigenous. To be Indigenous is, I think, not a complicated thing, but as we talked about before, Indigenous identity is so complex. And so it's resilience, I think, is the simple way of putting it. We're still alive today from these first of people. It's a way of continuing on today. It's a way to live by. My favorite thing to look into is the resiliency, but also in the activist sense. They all have the ideology that, hey, we're still here. And to see Indigenous nations across the world still thriving today is a wonderful feeling because it's a success story and you know it's going to continue on, so it gives me hope. It's a good question with the American Indian movement and how it's emphasized the generation with that. And I honestly can feel the long-lasting effects of that. And so whenever I talk about my grandparents, my grandmother, she lived in Minnesota when she was my age. She was a part of the American Indian movement when she was a teenager. And so anytime I go about something in my life now, she tells me about the movements or the things that she was a part of. The American Indian movement was significant for the time that it came out. Obviously there were movements in the past before, but this is the biggest of its time. And so it builds power within our people because it means, hey, it happened once before, we can do it again, and this time we can be stronger. There's power in knowing who you come from, whether it's a person or distinctly a tribe. And so I would encourage anybody who wants to relearn their Indigenous identity